All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of JNUC. It's so good to be here with y'all. Hope everyone had a good breakfast, had some coffee, good night rest last night, and didn't stay out too late. My name is Jesse. I'm here to introduce Robert Thompson from Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and he's going to talk today a little bit on the case of the roaming employee. So give it up for Robert, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. So, Robert.
All right, thanks for coming out. I guess it's not the hottest of topics, but we'll see what we get here. So I do not have a Massachusetts accent. I actually live in Atlanta. There's a bit of a story there, but we do have contractors and state employees. But as far as I know, to be a state employee, you have to actually go up to Boston and brave everything that comes with that. So we'll start a little bit about me, why I did this session. We have a small group. We may be able to do some more interactive stuff. We'll see how that goes. How and why the state has chosen to do what we're doing with these devices, and what I'll call war stories here, examples of what we do. Actually, yesterday there was one that I was sharing with the coworkers. So a little bit more about me. Like I said, I'm a Georgia boy. I was born in South Georgia, my undergrad, and then moved up to Atlanta 2003. Because in Georgia, you have Atlanta and the rest of Georgia. At the time, I did my master's at Southern Poly. If anybody knows it, that's Kennesaw now. And I have taught college courses in the past, as well as these corporate events and training. I did spend about a decade in banking and mortgages, for better or for worse. Ran away from that because it's a crazy business, and pretty happy with the state now and doing government. Let's see, I did have a short stint after being at one of the competitors to Jamf. We were joking that we're calling it Clarissa because we don't know what Omnissa wants to be named tomorrow. So I actually had a bit of a stint there, and then went into healthcare. But my ultimate job, oddly, or whatever, would have been a pilot. So that's a little bit more about me. Okay, so this is basically the policy of the state-owned devices. So any of you that have, our business per se, I guess, is in the state of Massachusetts, right? So if employees were to leave the U.S., and so forth, they kind of put a microscope under what that employee is doing, working outside of the U.S. And so this is actually the policy, and it's, I didn't give you the long legalese, these are the main bullet points, but basically we have to review the device, make sure it's on a recent version. We review the device when it leaves. They actually have to put in a ticket. It goes to legal for review to make sure that, I guess, it makes sense for the employee to continue to use their device outside of the U.S. And then, as I was reading through the policy there, and there was a point that came up on a session yesterday, maybe we need to consider actually swapping out and giving them burner phones. And/or looking at lockdown mode. We'll take those ideas back to the powers that be and see if that's something we want to do. Why are we doing this? So, as I said, it's normally forbidden. And actually, if you were to try to come in, to the O365 services, for instance, internationally, you're just going to be blocked right up front. So not only are we monitoring, as you'll see in these examples, on the MDM side, and the data that we see from the MDM, if the employee is outside the US, they're also going to get that block if they try to go to like webmail, Teams, any of the O365 apps. So that is also in place there too. So, what happens if one of these devices gets lost? It's maybe stolen. We hope that nobody would be targeted, but you never know. These hackers, if you hear the war stories, sometimes they're looking at infrastructure to attack, and if they see, the employee or they've tracked or what have you, we don't know. Network communication. So there's actually, on a later slide, I got an ad for a device that's like a hardware VPN, allegedly. I haven't actually seen it in action. Not sure if any of you guys have, but that was very interesting to me that you can connect these devices to some sort of hardware VPN, and then what are you doing with that traffic? So there's all types of things, of concern, once they leave. And, we work hard for our time off. Probably, I would argue, harder than many other countries in the world for our time off. Why are you not enjoying your time off? So I think that sometimes comes into the rationale of, okay, you're leaving on vacation here, why do you still need your device? And is there another employee that can do your job while you're gone? If there's not another employee that can do your job while you're gone, maybe that's another question, right, that needs to come up there. So I'm hoping that these, you can see these fields, but if you look, if you're either on Jamf or the other MDMs or should have this capability, but how often do you guys go in and actually view your device report? Are you scrolling over to the right? Are you adding these additional columns? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe when we get into some of the Q&A. But, a lot can be gleaned off of roaming information, IMEIs. These devices now support 2 IMEIs. And when we get to some of the examples, maybe we'll talk about what we're seeing in some of the real-time use of these. But it's not a bad idea. Now, also, I will say that there are probably more advanced things. So we probably have close to 3,000, 2,500, 3,000 devices. So that's probably on the lower end. Not sure, where you guys have on more. So there may be opportunities to automate this, throw it into Splunk, alert off of these data fields. But it just, again, depends on how focused you are and all the different data points that are coming in. So how old are we in the room? Anybody remember Murder, She Wrote? Okay, phew. I'm glad a couple people remember that hot mess of a show. So this is a bit small, but I'll go through, I may have to actually, I didn't bring my glasses up here, so I may walk over here and realize how small it's gonna be. So actually, the reason that I say it's the Murder, She Wrote list is that's our team thread. So it's 3 of us, my coworker Chris is here with me, and another coworker that's back home. And as I see the anomalies, as I see the data come in, as I check it, that's the name of the Teams thread. So I'm throwing some examples in here. So as a means to also, if you're gonna do some more advanced alerting, reporting on this type of data, you may need like a data dictionary to start with. So what I've tried to do here, and you'll see another slide coming up, is the international carriers that we have come across. Because sometimes it's just a 5-letter acronym, and I'll get it back in a second. I just can't see the screen, sorry. But the acronym, sometimes you cannot actually reconcile, so you have to do some Google checking there. So we'll take a look here. We've got someone in Switzerland. It was called Sunrise. I found an article there. Aruba, Setar, I believe I'm saying that right. In May, we had a UK carrier, EE, that was a little more familiar to me that popped up. We did have some folks, or 1 or 2 that went down to the Dominican Republic. Claro came up on that. We are close to the Canadian border, so every now and then we do see some Bell Canada hits on those. So what usually happens when these go down is I'll alert, it's the 3 of us in the thread. I would say most of them we're already aware of. So the employee has done what they're supposed to do. They go in and do the exception. And then they will, will add their roaming plan through the carrier so that they actually have coverage, when they're there. And then, of course, when they come back, we'll take that roaming plan off. But again, the reason we're doing this is auditing as we get into some of these other examples of why the employee is maybe there or should not be there. Let's see. It's also an anomaly that I'll point out there. Back in May, sometimes randomly, because when you pull this report, and I will assume this will be the same with most of the MDMs, it's that point in time. So you'll see some interesting anomalies every now and then where it's pulling in past data, maybe for a couple of weeks ago. But really, when you take that report, as I'm using it here, it's that point in time. So the reason that I mentioned that to you, you may want to catalog these. And this came up with one of the employees that I'll get to later, let's say a month or 2 later. There was a question about what that employee had done months ago. So when I pull these reports, I'm saving them off, and that has a date and timestamp, but I have seen a need to actually go back and view, during that time period or when we pulled that report, what that employee did. If you look at that phone today, it's not gonna show that because again, just keep in mind, this is just a snapshot of what you see when you pull the report. India, we had an issue where an employee took the phone to India and swapped out the SIM card and was using that. And the biggest reason, the other columns that you may see in the report is the actual phone number. The one that jumped out at me is when I sorted the list by the phone number that was in use on the device, it ended up all the way at the bottom because it was like a 9-1 Indian phone number. That one actually pulled it out, and it ended up that I believe in that case, it was an old phone that the employee still had that we had never collected. We ended up recovering the old phone out of this. So it kind of becomes a little bit of investigation with all these devices and what actually ends up there. We do have a alert on our carrier that tells us if the device is actually incurring roaming and we don't have the plan on there. That one is not that big a deal because pretty much all the employees are defaulted to not have service when the device tries to roam. That's done through the carrier side, but it may be something that you want to keep in mind there. Let's see, we have one in France as well. June, an AT&T number is showing up on his iPhone that is likely a personal number. So this gets into some of the other parts of this. Do you really want to track the SIM cards that the employee is putting in there? Are they physical SIM cards and or eSIMs? So the newer iPhone models that are out there, you can't put one of those old physical SIM cards in those. So you may have to track that as you go. And ended up also, he was forwarding his work number to a personal number. So we do see that sometimes as well. So, again, this was one of the lists that I mentioned, and I'm going to use the handouts and slides feature after the session to get a little more data to you guys. Because again, that column that shows up in the report with all the different carriers, that may be useful to you if you decide to take these ideas and build out something more robust. That alerts you, that, Splunk, whatever. So that data dictionary may be good for something to start, for you guys. So as I mentioned, eSIMs a moment ago, if that is useful or, to track that. Are you auditing for SIM swaps? If the employee decides to take that SIM out or put a different one in there, tracking that. And then probably the most interesting case has been an employee. They started out, if I go back in time with this employee, they had an iPhone 8. We ended up updating and giving that employee a newer iPhone. So they actually had 2 iPhones in their possession. And then later they said, or the manager said they actually need an Android device. So we try to be mostly an Apple shop. We do have an exception on some of the highway users and a specific app they have where we'll give them the Android device. Well, for whatever case, these employees are spread out all over the state, they still had the 2 old iPhones in their possession. And one of them showed up in Africa once. That was an interesting conversation. And then the older iPhone suddenly popped into the report with a different carrier. I don't know if I listed it here. I think it may have been T-Mobile. And my coworker called the employee phone because we could see the phone number in the MDM, and a gentleman answered. And he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm so-and-so's son, and how did you get this phone?" "Oh, well, my mom gave it to me." So, if you have things like this going on in your organization, the reason I'm sharing this whole thing with you is that permitted? Is it unacceptable? And so forth. That particular case did actually lead to an HR disciplinary action with that particular employee. And is this stuff enough? So, we are looking at moving over to Jamf, and one of the items that we've looked at, we haven't had a hard demo of it, but is the executive threat protection. If any of you attended the session yesterday, where they actually had a couple of video demos, one of them was the Pegasus, everything they're doing with those, that was a very interesting demo and video to watch. So we do have some high-profile people, that we service within the state here. Our secretary is probably 2 or 3 lines down from the governor, and You never know what these hackers are up to. You may want to go even further with something like the executive threat protection that Jamf has. Let's see. Sorry, this is small. Yep. Any of you guys use executive threat protection? No. So this is kind of a new thing. So I did grab some screenshots of that. Again, I have not seen a hard demo. I've just seen the screenshots, the literature, and some online demos. But this is, it's going beyond just the apps that are on the devices. It's going beyond where the device is located. It's actually looking at, I think when they showed that video yesterday of Pegasus, it's a Trojan that's running in the background. And if anybody didn't see it, basically you had the phone itself sitting right next to I'd say the watching device. And they actually powered the iPhone down completely, allegedly, but the other device was still able to see the camera live on the other device. So that's just an example of, a threat here you could mitigate if you have some, higher visibility employees there. It is a bit pricier, so you probably want to reserve it for those high-profile people, but it's up to you there. These were some other screenshots that I promised from earlier, where you've got the hardware VPN. I don't know if anybody's seen that in action, but I can imagine it being like a router, and that router is then tunneling the traffic back somewhere. But most all the times when we think of VPN, I think of software VPN. You've got a configuration on the device, but this, as I understand it, would kind of be invisible to that because the device is connecting to this network, and then we don't know what the traffic is doing from that router, or what are they calling it, hardware VPN, to somewhere else. That could be something that you may want to look into. And then multi-band antennas. That was another one when I was doing research for the session here that was interesting. I've, again, not seen these in action, but it's just throwing these ideas and things out there of what you may want to look for. So I may have spoken too fast, but I'm here for questions. It's a small little group. I'm glad to take any questions or ideas on what we're doing here. Yeah, he's bringing a mic too if you want to wait for it.
So how do you validate if somebody's gone through your policy, the written policy of needing to check in first to get allowance to go on travel, and they just decide to go travel? Is it just the detection of a different country's carrier, or do you have other methods?
Yeah, so let me go back to that slide. So for example, when you pull the report review data like this, it's more auditing periodically, is looking at today's snapshot of all the devices, but then we would potentially reach out, sorry. Oh, sorry, I'm messing up the recording. No, it's looking and auditing the carriers that are there, but it depends on they're all this different situations sometimes. It could be a VIP that just made an assumption and hopped on a plane. Not a whole lot we can really do in that case. It could be the more extreme case, like I said, of the random iPhone showing up in Africa and Ethiopia. That raised a few more eyebrows because the employee technically had violated a couple of different policies there, and that one did turn into an HR issue. I think all of us in IT, I've said it several times, I've been in this business for a long time, we are sometimes put in the position of being the cop, the bad cop, but these employees do not report to us. So you have to have friends in other places, HR, maybe the manager of the employee, and we're a little more tightly knit group. I've worked at other organizations that were probably 10, 15 times the size of just our little state organization. We're kind of a tight knit group. I know one of the coworkers that Chris and I have, Marianne's been there like 20 something years, and just the tribal knowledge that she has, and you can bounce things off of her pretty quickly, and she's like, oh yeah, that's this, and we're done. It's that tribal knowledge that's hard to replicate, because I've only been with the state almost 2 years now. So does that make it's kind of a good answer? Yeah. There's Chris back here.
I just wanted to add to what Robert said. When someone goes overseas, technically we're supposed to have an international access ticket.
Yep.
That doesn't always happen, and that's kind of a lot of where this auditing winds up coming in, because we found out that someone, for instance, gets permission, to work out of, say, the Dominican Republic because of a sick relative, and we didn't know, and the proper tickets weren't put through. They were just allowed to go without all that vetting.
Yep.
It's a little bit crazy making.
And this is the excerpt from the policy. I didn't paste the whole thing. As you can imagine, lawyers were involved and all kinds of stuff. These are basically the main high-level bullet points. If you're looking for an idea to, if this is a concern maybe you're bringing up in your organization, something that your management really needs to pay attention to, it may be a good starting place for you too, right?
So with the newer phones and the eSIMs, you can have two.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked yet, but does Jamf detect both eSIMs, or is it only the active eSIM carrier that gets reported in?
So for full disclosure, this is the screenshot from Jamf Pro. You do have a field IMEI2. But you do want to get a comfort level with this. Because I said it's a snapshot when you pull it at that exact time. And that particular device is moving from place to place. It's attaching to certain carriers. The data may or may not be there. We've seen some very interesting anomalies. So it is data that you want to get comfortable with first before you start raising your hand and pointing fingers at an employee, because the last thing I want to do is accuse an employee of doing something they didn't do, or there was a rationale for it. But the field is there. I will say that most of our devices right now are in Omnissa Workspace 1 is the current name today of it, and they have complementary information, or the same fields, because it comes in from the MDM sample when we pull it in from the device.
And do you know if, so when I travel legally,
Mm-hmm.
I have the company eSIM, and then I buy like a local international eSIM.
Mm-hmm.
So they can either both be on, or you can turn one on, one off. Does this data reflect whether they're configured or if they're active?
It's going to be a case by case. So that's, like I said, you've got to get comfortable. I would say some cases it does, but I've seen others. The example I pulled this week, for example, the device, there's also another field not shown here that I can pull from the other MDM. It said the start and end roam dates and times. So the device I had this week, I showed no international carrier, but it had about a day or a week, I think, Chris, if you have the example back there, but it was like a week that it showed the device was roaming. A couple of things could have happened there. So as I understand it, when the device goes to another country, it connects or phones home to the local cell carrier, it flips to a roaming state. But when that happens, I've seen some examples where it'll show the carrier, but in the start and end time is maybe about 2 minutes at the most, or a minute. Because sometimes if you've gone outside the US, you'll get a text message from that local carrier and says, hey, welcome to ABC country, but you don't have a plan here. So it's going to cut it off because you don't have a roaming agreement or what have you. So we do see some examples of that, I think, sometimes. So again, it's just getting comfortable with the data. And you can also reach out to the employee. Most of the time, it's not an adversarial thing. We reach out to the employee and we say, hey, we saw something on the device. I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but what actually went down, to make sure that you're comfortable with the reporting that you're doing. But for now, they're all kind of a case-by-case basis. So. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys. And any other questions? All right. And like I said, if you want, I'm going to, probably in a week or two, I think I've got another deadline coming up. You've got references to some of the stuff. I know you can't see the URLs, but you can actually click on these and it'll take you over to some documentation. You've got references on these. One of them is called a flipper device. I think it's like a tracking if you want to dig into what that was or is. ExpressVPN another example of that VPN service. So again, just giving you info that I've come across, and hopefully it's helpful to you guys as you are working in your organizations.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. And yeah, we got a little bit of time until next session starts, so feel free to grab coffee. There might be snacks outside. Yeah, we'll see you guys around.